There are people who are greatly in tune to the spiritual world. Whether you believe in this sort of thing is really just a moot point, because at the end of it all, it doesn't matter if you're a believer of ghosts, demons, angels, and other worldly things. It doesn't change the fact that they exist. Some people are just a bit more aware of their presence than others, and it's these sorts of people that they like to mess with the most. Number 3. It was the summer of 1966. I was 12 years old and visiting my family in Daegu, South Korea. I came from what people would refer to as a noble household, so it sufficed to say that we lived in a pretty large house in the center of the city. The layout of our home was simple and practical. A large metal gate that surrounded our home, and once past the gate, you were able to gain access to the walkway that led up to the main house. Korea was still a developing nation, especially it being just a little over a decade after the conclusion of the Korean War. So, as it stands, a lot of homes had the bathrooms located outside of the main house. Yes, outhouses. Those things I'm sure most of you like to compare to as porta potties nowadays. The rain was pouring down. Korean summers are the equivalent to monsoon season, so heavy downpours were common. It was the middle of the night and I had to go to the bathroom. It was a little ways from the main house, and the fastest access was through the great room's side entrance through a sliding door. Grabbing the umbrella from the little container by the door, I had slipped on my outdoor shoes and opened up the umbrella just as I heard the sound of the door buzzer from the front gate. Looking over my shoulder, I squinted so I could make sure I could tell what time it was from the clock on our mantel. Nope, I hadn't been imagining it. It was just after 2 a.m. Who in the world would be ringing the buzzer at this time of night? I stepped off the back porch onto the stone walkway, the rain thundering over my head against the umbrella. "Hello?" I called. There was no answer. My grandmother was a superstitious sort of woman. She always told me that when a stranger came to your door, especially in the middle of the night, you were always supposed to call out to it 3 times before going to answer the door. If you didn't call out 3 times and tried to answer beforehand, you would be snatched up by a tokibi, or what is commonly referred to as a goblin. The buzzer rang again, and I took another step forward. "Who is it?" Again, no response. The rain started to ease up some, but the buzzer didn't ring for a 3rd time. I wasn't relieved. Instead, my hand gripped the handle of my umbrella even tighter, and I took one more cautious step forward. "Who's there? Is anyone out there?" An uneasy feeling welled up inside of my chest. I chalked it up to it being late, raining, and needing to pee. After a few more seconds of silence, I turned to head off toward the direction of the outhouse when something appeared in the corner of my eye. I craned my neck slowly, turning to look back to the gate only to see a pale hand appearing over the edge of the gate in the rain. Typically, most people would attribute this to just being another Asian person attempting to break into my house, but no human being was whiter than a sheet unless they had makeup. Waterproof makeup didn't exactly exist back then either. The arm belonged to a woman, long and slender and creeping ever so slowly over the edge of the gate. It was attempting to unlock the door. I hadn't even realized that I'd dropped my umbrella and was now completely soaked through from the rain. My voice had been lost in that moment before it returned promptly, and I let out a horrified scream before turning and attempting to make my way back into the house. I slipped on the wet gravel, my shoes flying off my feet completely as I fell to the ground. Still screaming, I managed to get myself off the ground and tore off to the house, only to slam my leg onto the edge of the porch. Later, I would learn that I had hit my leg so hard that I had busted the skin and my bone was showing, but no blood was coming out. It was so numb. By the time my family came out to see what in the world was going on, I was a soaking wet and shaking mess on the floor. My aunt came to see if I was all right, taking note of the terror on my face. I wasn't even aware of what was happening, and it took about 4 cups of hot tea and a Chinese herbal pill to finally calm me down. Once I'd gotten myself put back together, I told my uncle what had happened. "There was no one there," he said. I blinked at him in disbelief. That couldn't have been true. There was no way I had been hallucinating. "I know what I saw, Uncle. Someone was trying to get into this house." "You don't remember, but in the middle of all your screaming, you were pointing to the door, so I went to see who might have been there. But when I opened the gate, there was no one." "That was impossible." "I'm not crazy, Uncle, I swear." "I'm not saying you are, but you're lucky. If that was a ghost, you would have been in some serious trouble." I agreed. I'm glad I hadn't opened the gate. Number 2. Most of my family lived out in the countryside. My dad was an active duty officer in the Korean military, so I was often shuffled around between my relatives during the holidays. I had opted not to go to high school since it was only required to finish out middle school. I couldn't afford tuition and my father couldn't be bothered, so I often just worked in the city and would come out to the country during my vacation days. Country life was peaceful, but there were a lot of the kids my age who often thought the simplest of things were the most amazing. Take movies, for instance. There were no actual theaters in Gyeongju in the early 70s, so whenever a movie would be playing, it often was showcased for outdoor screenings where most people would pitch up tents and watch the movie on a giant sheet. A lot of the movies they got were also dropped down very late in comparison to their release dates in the cities. I was 17 at the time and visiting my family for Chuseok, or Korean Harvest Festival, coming down a couple of days early so some kids were still in school. A lot of my friends whined and prodded me to come out to see a movie with them that night. The Red Scarf, it was called, about a Korean fighter pilot during World War II. I had already seen the movie when it debuted over in Daegu, and had told them this, but they weren't listening. It hadn't mattered if I had seen it or not. It had been months since they'd last seen me and wanted to hang out, so I didn't think anything of it. Since my family lived out in the country, not many buses ran in and out of town. The last bus had already come and gone, so my group and I just walked like we normally did. We still had a good bit of daylight before it was time for the movie, and we chatted amongst ourselves, catching up on the latest gossip and them grilling me on what life was like in the big city. On the way into town, there was a dirt road you had to walk along with a man-made lake off to the side that broke off into a clearing. During the off-season, some farmers had planted rice in the lake as a backup supply, but that had been back during the war. There really wasn't a need for it now, and I had always wondered why no one had even bothered to fill up the lake. There weren't fish in it, and no one planted rice there anymore, so it just seemed like a wasted bit of space. Whenever I asked this question to any of the elders in the village, they simply said that they weren't allowed to touch it, and I, feeling that was all I needed to sate my curiosity, left it at that. We made it into town where everyone had set up the tents, and after getting a few snacks, we sat down and watched the movie. They, of course, responded with the amazement I knew they would have. After chatting a bit more, we gathered up all of our stuff and started back on the dirt road back to the countryside where our houses were. Since most of the people I hung out with were guys, it didn't come as a surprise that they were the stereotypical country boys who like to get into scuffles like any young kids do. As we were walking back, said group of scrappy boys decided they wanted to pick a fight with my friends. I wasn't about to get tangled up in all of that, so when they left me on my own, I didn't think much of it. The only thing I was pissed off about was how they'd taken the only flashlight. After being abandoned, I made my way back onto the main dirt road heading back toward the country. There weren't streetlights back then, so I had to just trust my eyes and hope that they adjusted as best they could under the light of the half moon in the sky. The air was still, the cicadas crying their shrill songs along with the soft crunch of my boots on the dirt path. Though it was difficult to see, I knew that I would be approaching the man-made lake soon. Stuffing my hands into my pockets, I walked on without much thought to where I was really walking, my mind wandering to other things, my family, my friends, and what I was planning to eat when I got back to the house. A soft gust of wind brushed up against me, and I suddenly heard the soft cries of a young girl. Turning my head, I tried to peer into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything past 3 feet ahead of me. The crying seemed a little ways off, and I paused in my steps, turning towards the direction of the sound. "Hey, who's there? What's the matter?" The crying continued, coming closer, and I could hear the soft scuffling of feet on the ground getting just a little bit closer. Are you lost? Don't cry, just follow behind me. The little girl's voice sobbed a little, hiccuped, and then continued crying softly, but now it seemed as though she were only a few feet from me. Motioning with my arm, I turned and started walking again. Just follow the sound of my feet and voice, okay? I know it's dark, but just trust me. I continued walking, the young girl continuously crying behind me, but she kept her pace with me, so I was grateful that I didn't have to slow down further to help her. As we got closer to the lake, though, her crying suddenly grew louder and it started to get annoying. There was only so much patience my 17-year-old self could give. I told her several times to stop crying and she just wouldn't do it. When it got to the point that she was basically all but wailing in my ear, I stopped and turned around even though I still couldn't really see anything clearly in front of me. If you don't shut the hell up, I'm going to kick your ass into that lake. Stop crying! And just like that, the crying stopped. Everything was silent except for the sound of the cicadas and the soft wind blowing through the trees. I took a moment and looked around, wondering if I had scared the girl into silence. Hey, are you there? But there was no answer. Nothing. After calling for her several more times, I figured she had gotten upset at my yelling and decided to go off on her own. Not thinking much of it, I turned and started off back to the path and went back to my uncle's house. When I got there, they asked why it had taken me so long to get back home, and I told them about the girl I was trying to walk home who left after I yelled at her to quit crying. My uncle's face drained of color, and when I asked him what was wrong, I could visibly see him swallowing the lump in his throat. A lot of people have drowned in that lake walking alone at night. They say the ghost of a young girl who committed suicide there will drag them into the lake with her before they get a chance to get past it. I never walk that path alone at night ever again. Number 1. I have often been told that I was very in tune to the spiritual world, even as a child. I'm not sure if I really believe it, at least not the bit about me being able to see spirits and the like since I was younger, but I can't deny that I have always been able to feel the presence of unknown things around me. I had often brushed them off as being paranoid, but a lot of the elders insisted that I had power and needed to be more respectful to the spirits that belonged to the underworld. Years passed and I moved through various cities and intermingling with different people. I think I had changed addresses more in the last 5 years than anyone did in their entire life. Some locations were quiet and I was able to live my life in peace. Others were merely annoyances. I handled it like I always had, ignoring those weird feelings I often got and went about my normal routine in life. Wake up, coffee, work, drinks with my coworkers, home, dinner, and sleep. Rinse and repeat. I was 28 years old, living in Daegu and in the process of changing jobs again. Getting a job closer to the heart of the city, I couldn't be bothered to commute from the outskirts back into town every single day, so I opted to get a place inside the city within walking distance of my job. I was young and trekking several blocks every day wasn't going to kill me. There were very few places available in the city, even fewer that were reasonably priced and in a decent neighborhood. After sifting through the local newspaper, I lucked out and found a place that was on the market and the pricing was reasonable as well. I went to the real estate agency in charge of having put the house up and the agent looked at me in surprise. I didn't understand what his deal was, so I figured I would be like my usual blunt self and see what his problem was. What? Why are you looking at me like that? There was a moment of silence before he loosened his tie nervously. You're not from around here, are you? I'm from all over. Now tell me why you're looking at me so strangely. Well, there's rumors that the place is haunted, but even the fortune tellers say that whatever is in that house is a very angry spirit, stronger than anything they had ever felt before, and it's almost impossible to cleanse. "Oh, come on," I scoffed and looked at him like he'd lost his mind. I must have mirrored the expression he had earlier. Well, almost. I'm sure I looked much more annoyed. "You have got to be kidding me." "No, I'm very serious. No one has ever made it longer than 3 months in that house. It's a place with very bad energy." I wanted to question why they didn't just tear the place down, but I remembered something my grandmother had once told me. That if there were bad spirits, angry spirits inside of a place, the last thing you wanted to do was disturb their territory. They would chase after every generation in your line until your own spirits and those of your family couldn't rest peacefully. Sighing, I shook my head and grabbed a pen from the cup on his desk. "Just give me the paperwork. I'm moving in. It's the only place I can afford right now. Bring on the dead." It took almost no time for me to finish the paperwork and was moved into my new residence before the end of the week. The first couple of days in the house, I had probably subconsciously psyched myself out. There would be random noises in the middle of the night that attributed to it being normal seasonal noises of the home contracting and expanding based on the temperature outside. However, 2 weeks into my stay, things started to get a little bizarre. I came home late from my shift and hanging out with my coworkers. I was a little drunk and staggering into the house, dumping my keys and purse on the counter, and peeled my clothes off layer by layer before collapsing into the bed. It didn't take long for me to fall asleep. Shh. I opened my eyes, greeted only by darkness as I heard the sliding door to my closet slip open slightly. I didn't have to see to know it had been my closet. I assumed it had just loosened itself. This place wasn't exactly brand new. Figuring it was just the house being obstinate and old, I rolled back over in bed to go back to sleep. Not even 5 minutes later, there was an incessant tapping on the wall above my headboard. It was like a demonic woodpecker trying to eat away at my wall. Drunk and frustrated, I sat up immediately and slammed my hand on the wall. "Cut that shit out! I'm trying to sleep!" Silence. Beautiful silence. I went back to bed and wasn't bothered for the rest of the night. About a month in my stay, I was able to enjoy the peace of the house. My routine wasn't broken, and outside of the occasional weird noise, a creak and moan from the floorboards or walls, I moved around relatively undisturbed. Again, I came home after a long day of work and a night out with friends. One of my girlfriends coming home with me because she had lost her house key and it was well past hours for her to get a new key cut. She whined at me to make food for her, and after that I put her up in the spare bedroom, and it didn't take long for her to pass out. After washing up, I went to my own room and settled in to have a good night's rest. I'm not sure if I was asleep for 10 minutes or an hour, but the temperature in my room immediately began to change. It was as if the warmth was being sucked slowly out of the room, the sudden shift causing me to move in discomfort in my sleep. The air started to grow thin and cold, and it was at this point that I woke up but kept my eyes closed. In the far corner of my bedroom was where the chill was coming from, seeping through the walls and filling my room as though a slow change in air pressure was happening. Colder and colder it started to grow to the point where I could feel my legs and arms trembling slightly beneath my blankets. That's when I felt it. You know that feeling you get when you know you're being watched? The sort of feeling that someone is hovering over your bedside looking down at you? You don't have to open your eyes and know that someone is there because you can just feel their presence. That was what I felt, mere inches from my face. Had I opened my eyes, I'm sure I would have been staring back into the piercing cold eyes of some otherworldly creature. I kept my eyes closed. I didn't even breathe. Instead, I balled my hands into tight fists and squeezed, feeling my nails digging into my palms as the pain kept my mind clear and free of the fear that threatened to eat me up inside. There wasn't a sound being made in the room save for my own breathing, but I could still feel a face inching ever so closer to me, the room growing colder by the second. And then, a few seconds later, I heard the sound of tissue being pulled from the tissue box I kept next to me on my bedside table. 1, 2, 3. I sat up, threw the blankets off me, and screamed at the top of my lungs before grabbing the box of tissue and hurling it across my bedroom. Letting out another scream, I scrambled out of my bed and quickly turned on the lights, my chest rising and falling with each labored breath I took. I don't know what the shit you are, but you better get the hell out of here and stay out! You got that, you fucking cocksucker? There was nothing. Only silence. My friend who had been staying with me that night came into the room, my screaming having pulled her out of her drunken slumber. When she asked me what was wrong, I told her that it was nothing and to just go back to bed. After she was convinced that I was, in fact, okay, she left to go back to her room. I went to the bathroom and splashed my face with cold water so I could free myself of the stress and anxiety that had washed over me, then returned to my room so I could finally get some sleep. The cold feeling had left my room. Just as I was getting ready to get back into bed, I caught something on the floor out of the corner of my eye. There, by my bedside table, were 3 squares of tissue discarded on the floor.